In my second sermon, I talked about Samuel's call story. And in last week's sermon, I talked about where we come from. And today's scripture is about where Samuel comes from. Samuel is the son of Hannah. And he came from a story of pain and suffering and hope. I feel like suffering is a topic that you'll hear about from the pulpit, but not as much from the pews. Usually from the pulpit, we try to tackle theodicy, which is that fancy word for why bad things happen to good people. And that's an important topic. But how often do we just sit with people in their pain? I feel like so often people try to put on a happy face or bulldoze their way through their pain, or they might politely ask for prayer. They don't want to burden others or seem weak or crazy. Men are taught to toughen up, don't cry. Women fear appearing hysterical. Like both of the women in our stories today who were shamed for seeking help. Unfortunately, there often is shame and stigma attached to feeling pain. We're afraid to be vulnerable with each other, but we're human. Each and every one of us experiences pain. In my experience in the church, there's an extra layer of stigma that looks like that if you show your pain, people will think your faith is weak. Because if your faith were strong, then you'd just be okay all the time, no matter what's going on in your life. I think the only time I've really witnessed anything close to that in my ministry is when someone's ready to die and they just are at peace because they're ready for this part of the journey to be over. But the rest of us, we're not quite there yet, right? Probably the greatest suffering of my life has been my anxiety disorder that I've had since I was 11 years old. It feels very vulnerable telling you this because I know the stigma and the shame attached to it in our society. Even though 19% of adults in the U.S. have diagnosed anxiety disorders, there's still such a stigma around it. And those are just the diagnosed cases. There are plenty more people suffering in silence. So if there is about 100 people here today, about 20 of us are suffering with anxiety. So I just want to say, I see you, and you don't need to be ashamed of it. I once had a parishioner tell me that if I only had faith, I would not have my anxiety disorder. It's comments and beliefs like this that make it hard for people to share their struggles, especially in church. We see stories in the Bible that say your faith has made you well. We saw some of these stories today. And there are amazing miracle stories out there. But there are also faithful people suffering with medical problems and other things. My faith gets me through the hard times, but it hasn't cured me of them. My anxiety is the reason I have the relationship with God that I have, because I've leaned so heavily on God all these years to get me through. So let me ask you today, where does it hurt? Where does it hurt for you? We all have something. In our first scripture passage, the woman dealt with a chronic illness. Chronic illnesses can be a source of suffering because it's something you constantly live with and have to manage. Maybe you have a chronic illness. Can you imagine the woman's desperation to be healed? She went to doctor after doctor after doctor, and not only could they not heal her, she grew worse and worse. And then she learned about this healer, and she just had to get to him. She was desperate for a healing. And she touched his cloak and was healed. Can you imagine the joy of that healing? So our first woman dealt with a physical ailment, and Hannah also had a physical ailment, but she also suffered in her heart. Hannah was dealing with infertility. I've walked with enough friends through this to know how profoundly this can affect a person. So many people suffer in silence with infertility. It's one reason I don't ask people if or when they're having kids, because it can be a very triggering question for someone who so desperately wants a child and is struggling to have one. Where does it hurt for you? Maybe it's physical pain. Maybe it's grief or loneliness. Maybe it's anxiety or depression. Maybe it's an addiction you or someone close to you is dealing with. Maybe it's a relationship or financial struggle. Maybe it's a prayer that you keep on praying that has not been answered yet. Maybe it's an unfulfilled dream. Whenever I'm in pain, I turn to God and I turn to others. I lean on God through the difficult times, and I also lean on my friends and family. When you're in pain, where do you turn? Reverend Melissa McDade said, "If Jesus' robe can be a conduit of healing, then we can be too." We may not be able to heal someone's physical disease, but we can help ease someone else's suffering. Because of my anxiety, I've been in and out of therapy most of my life. Some practitioners are better than others, but it wasn't until 3 years ago that I found someone who just made me feel so seen and accepted just as I was, and that helped me in my path to healing. I still have anxiety, maybe I always will, but my suffering is a bit less since working with her. In our story today with Hannah, the peace she experienced didn't come when she got pregnant. The peace came when someone heard her fervent prayer and validated her and blessed her. At first, Eli thought she was drunk, and she said, "I haven't been drinking, I'm in anguish. I am pouring my soul out to the Lord." Goodness, in all of my years of suffering, do you know what I wanted to hear? Someone to tell me I wasn't alone. For the first several years of my anxiety disorder, I felt like I was the only person in the world going through it because I didn't see others going through it. People didn't talk about it. One of my anxieties is public speaking. I still question God on this choice, but here I am. Every week I get up here. And not only have I felt so frustrated with this anxiety, but I still feel alone in it because people don't talk about it. Public speaking is the number one fear. How could I possibly feel alone when it is the number one fear? Because people don't talk about it. So here I am, talking about it. I'm being vulnerable, sharing my pain with you today, because if I can help even one person feel less alone in their pain or less ashamed of their suffering, whatever it may be, then I know that I've done God's work today. In one of my churches that I served, we had a prayer group. It was a group of women who not only brought the prayer requests of the church, but lists of people and situations in their own lives. And this faithful group of women met every week to pour out their concerns, their pain, and their prayers to God and to one another. We walked with each other through our life and faith journeys, praying for everything you could possibly think of. Cancer diagnoses, fresh grief and decades-old grief, caring for children with disabilities, family members with addictions, dips in faith, spouses with dementia, custody battles, infertility and infant loss, violence in the world, broken bones, medical testing, chronic pain, unemployment, divorce, you named it, we prayed about it, and so much more in our 6 years together. We celebrated answered prayers and cried together, bearing each other's pain. Week after week, I would hear, I don't know what I would do without this group. We felt God's presence in that space. But there is also the physical presence of each other, the caring words, the comforting hugs, somebody to just sit with us. If Jesus' robe can be a conduit of healing, maybe we can too. How can you be a conduit of healing to those around you? Show up, be present, be a non-judgmental presence. Sit with them in their pain. That's not always an easy thing to do. Don't rush to offer platitudes to ease your own discomfort, but instead validate their feelings and stay present. As I said before, my faith helps me through the hard times. I'm still waiting for the miracle we see in these Bible stories, but I can say I have felt healing and progress. I've gotten better about holding on to hope. And maybe the miracle of no anxiety hasn't happened yet, but I think it's pretty miraculous that I couldn't even sit in a church when I was 11 years old, and now I preach in one every Sunday. It's been years of prayer and therapy and support that has gotten me to this point, and a whole lot of hope. I think what Hannah walked away with that day was hope. She didn't walk away with a baby in her womb, but hope in her heart. Hannah did go on to have a baby, but not every woman who wants one will. Sometimes prayers are answered in the ways that we want them to be, and other times they aren't. So what does hope look like to you in all circumstances? Hopefully you were given an index card this morning in your bulletin. If you don't have one, you can raise your hand and maybe one of our ushers will run one to you. Does anybody not have one who wants one? Okay. Oh, there's some in the pew too. So I'd like to ask you again, where does it hurt? I'm going to give you a moment to write down your pain. And when you come up for communion, you can place it in one of these baskets. You can just write down your pain, leave it anonymous. You can write it down with a note that says you'd like to talk to one of us about it. Or you can write it down and keep it to yourself if you're not ready to share. You don't owe anyone your story. If you're not ready to share your pain, don't feel like you have to. I just want you to know that you can. Whatever you decide, I just want you to know that you aren't alone. God is always with you, and we are here for you. So when you come up for communion, you can feel free to kneel at the altar rail as well and have a moment of prayer. And if you'd like Pastor Nancy or I to pray with you after church, you can come up to the front, and we will do so after we've greeted everybody. Church, of all places, should be a place that you can bring your pain. God can hold everything that you are thinking and feeling. God already knows it all. So pour out your soul to God. like Hannah did. And reach out to someone else like she did with Eli. Because sometimes a blessing from a friend is what we need too. And if you can, be with others in their need. Pastor Nancy and I are here for you. Reach out to us. There will always be pain in this world, but we can help each other ease some of the suffering along the way. And God